I'll call the meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Don, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Director House, do you have an off-the-agenda announcement to make?
Thank you, Chair Hardy. I just want to welcome Autumn Anderson, our 5th Planning Commissioner, to the Commission. As most of the public in the Commission will remember, we're short we were a 4-person commission until recently. Mr. Hale was seated, Commissioner Hale, and then we abruptly went back to a 4-person commission, and now Autumn came over from the Parks and Rec Commission and is serving us on the Planning Commission, and we welcome Autumn.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I was on the Parks and Rec for about a year and a half. Been in St. Helena for 15 years, and I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Thanks for joining us. Welcome. A meeting like this, I'm thinking we should order pizza, but maybe I shouldn't get carried away. Oh, I don't think we can do that, Bobby. Yeah, I'm not going to think about that. So, let's see. Roll call, please, Ms. Gamero.
Commissioner Hale,
Here.
Commissioner Monette,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Vice Chair Pont,
Here.
and Chair Hardy.
Here. This is the time for the public forum, but unless, Jesse, you would like to speak, I'm pretty sure this announcement is pointless. There's no one here to speak. So that's the end of the public forum. That gets us to consent items. 4.1, approval of minutes. Is there anyone who wishes to pull this from the consent calendar? If not, I'd love to hear a motion.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Ms. Gamero?
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Vice Chair Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Hale,
Yes.
Chair Hardy,
Yes.
and Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
No, you abstain.
Oh, abstain.
Just for the record, Commissioner Anderson will have to abstain as she was not a part of the commission.
Correct.
And that brings us to our public hearings, item 5.1. Who will present the staff report this evening? Director Hausch, please.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. Commissioners, I'll just wait for my PowerPoint to show up or to come up here. And the applicant is not here, and I'm not sure why. I just checked, and I have not received any messages. They're aware that tonight's the public hearing, so I'm not sure what the issue is. Potentially. I'll go ahead and get started. So as identified, the item is a use permit design review proposed by AT&T Mobility, and it is requesting design review and use permit approval to add a 12-foot extension onto the existing 93-foot tall PG&E lattice towers at 700 Dowdell Lane. In addition, the project includes a small equipment pad directly under the footprint of the tower for the associated equipment with regards to the infrastructure to power the antennas, and there is also a small emergency generator proposed as a part of the project. The applicant has provided some photo simulations which are included in the packet, which the bottom left corner of this slide shows the existing tower, and then the right kind of larger photograph is a rendering showing what the extension would look like with the additional equipment. And then up in the top left corner is a location map identifying 700 Dowdell, the corner location of the tower, and then also the direction of the photograph.
Can I ask you a question about this?
Absolutely.
Is that okay? Yes. Okay, you mean where the bottom arrow is supposedly where the top of the tower is now? No.
Oh, no. So those arrows are identifying the locations of equipment. So if you look in the bottom left, that picture there,
Oh, okay,
that's a picture of the tower as it is today.
okay.
And then the larger picture to the right is a photo simulation of what it would look like with the extra equipment.
So they're gonna move all the wires up higher.
No, actually, none of the wires changed. This is an extension of 12 feet of additional metal lattice that then antennas get attached to above the existing wires.
Almost like the one they did for Verizon, Bobby.
So the top of it is similar to that here, and they're adding that.
Okay, but the top, yeah, so the top wire, I was just trying to figure this. All right, thank you. This is really tall.
So this is just to identify some context for the project site. So the red star indicates the location of the cell tower. It's on a agriculturally designated parcel directly adjacent to industrial use properties, and then just a little bit away from some service commercial parcels. And then there is some residential properties to the north along Charter Oak.
And it's on the Star property.
That's right. This property is owned by Charlie Crocker, and it's the same site as the Crocker Star Winery. So this is a aerial photograph intended to give some context to the project site. So again, the red star here. It's worth noting, just given the scale, it's almost even hard to identify the location of the tower. However, it is in that location where the star is, and then kind of to the southeast on this is the location of the Crocker Star Winery, just for some more context. So just to get into some of the analysis as identified in the staff report, the project has been identified as qualifying for categorical exemptions under section 15301 and 15303. The site is designated agricultural by the general plan, and the zoning is winery, which does implement that general plan designation. Some of the unique elements of this project is that St. Helena does not have a current telecommunications ordinance, as we've discussed before. So we utilize existing code, which regulates the extension or height of electric power transmission towers, wireless antennas, et cetera. So there's some code language that does allow us to utilize the existing zoning code. However, we do not have a specific telecommunications ordinance, just to be aware. So under the applicable code sections, design review and a use permit is required. Staff did find that the project meets all the requirements of those zoning criteria, subject to the commission agreeing with the findings required for design review and use permit. Additional elements that are pertinent to this project are that there is some federal and state law that really restricts the city's ability to regulate telecommunications infrastructure. The federal government is seeing it as going in the way of utilities, and so they are trying to streamline the decision-making process for installation of the telecommunications equipment. However, local jurisdictions do still have some jurisdiction and discretion in approving these. However, there are very specific limitations, and so if the commission wants to go that way, staff would want to have a broader discussion. And there is a shot clock requirement as a part of some of these mandates that dictates certain processing timelines. And so if the commission is not comfortable acting on the project tonight, then they should direct staff to enter into a tolling agreement to stop or stay that shot clock timeline. And obviously the applicant would have to agree to that, but it's just something to be aware of should we get there if it's necessary. Again, some of the outstanding issues are just the shot clock timeline just discussed, and then also none of the decisions on cellular communication can be made based on concerns over radio frequency emissions. Those are addressed by federal law, and the cities and local jurisdictions are not allowed to make decisions based on those. Our jurisdiction is specific to our use permit and design review findings as identified in the zoning code and the staff report. So based on that, staff did find that the project meets all the zoning requirements and is consistent with the requirements of CEQA, and we are recommending that the Planning Commission determine the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15301 and 15303, and adopt a resolution to approve the use permit and design review, allowing the proposed 12-foot extension of an existing PG&E lattice tower and the installation of cellular panel antennas and associated equipment at 700 Dowdell Lane in the Winery Zoning District. Tom is here from AT&T, and he can, I'm not sure if you have a presentation or you want to add.
Well, before you begin, just a procedural matter. I'm trying to train myself to routinely ask about ex parte contacts before the presentation begins. So if anyone has met with the applicant or anyone else,
What?
or been to the site, this would be the time to disclose, and I'll just start. I did take a look at the site, but I have not met with the applicant or anyone else.
I also went out to the site, and I did talk to Pam Starr about it. She didn't have any concerns about the additional height, but she was concerned about being able to access the 3 vineyard rows on the opposite side of the tower if the concrete pad and fence are going to be put in underneath the tower for the equipment.
I did not speak with anyone. I've been over there, but I didn't go over specifically for this event.
I visited the site, but talked to no one, or didn't interact with anyone there.
Good evening. My name is Tom Johnson, representative here today for AT&T. Thanks, Noah. Sorry I missed the first half of your presentation. It was a struggle to get here on time, that's for sure. As Noah elaborately explained, this is an AT&T project for a 12-foot extension on an existing PG&E tower. We will be installing 9 antennas and supporting equipment on this tower for AT&T's use. One thing that has come to light in the last week that we'll probably want to discuss here is PG&E is no longer going to be allowing wood slatted fences under their towers. So there will be a change coming to these plans where it's going to be a wrought iron fence instead of a wood slat. That will be reflected in the construction drawings, but that communication is just happening right now. Outside of that, everything as you see and what Noah presented in the project is as is. I'm here for any questions and answers that I can provide for you.
Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant's representative?
Yeah,
I
I've
do
got a
too.
couple. So we're coming up with a design change at the last minute, and this is here for design review. Can we see a design of this wrought iron fence? Do we have any idea of what it's going to look like?
Yeah, it's just, it will be your standard typical wrought iron fencing that you
This
see.
is St. Helena. There is no standard typical wrought iron fence, so you want to try that one again?
It will be of the equal, same height. So right now, the existing wood slat is at 6 feet. The wrought iron fence will be at 6 feet. Your typical wrought iron spacing between from slat to slat or from post to post is anywhere from 5 to 6 inches. So you'll still see that aspect. It could probably get tightened even more if needed. Those standards are still being set by PG&E right now.
Once again, our approval tonight includes design review. So I'm
Right,
kind
but you're-
at this point, I would think your application isn't complete.
Well, but your approval could be contingent on planning and our project meeting a certain criteria for whatever wrought iron fencing is deemed appropriate, because ultimately, the wrought iron fence doesn't make this project.
Agreed, but it is design review. So, I would think we would need to see the design. That's statement one, which is sort of a question. But you don't have a design at the present time. You won't have a design till PG&E approves it
We're probably a week away.
a week away. So we don't even know if the design you guys have submitted to PG&E will be approved by PG&E.
Well,
So
we
this
do
could
know
be,
that the design will be approved as represented on these plans that's in front of you, aside from the fence.
yes, but the fence is the subject of discussion here. All right, so we don't know what it's going to look like.
Now, here's another caveat that just crossed my mind too to that, because, and this might have to be a larger scale discussion with PG&E, because one of the conditions that was imposed by the property owner on this project was to be a wood slatted fence. And that was communicated to PG&E and directed to us. So now that I play that through in my head, it could, if PG&E bows down and says, okay, fine, we will let this one pass, I don't know.
So I have a question that's related to what you've just explained. PG&E presumably has an easement for the transmission line
That's correct.
over the subject property. Does AT&T then derive its rights directly from PG&E?
Yeah, so the
And
way
does the
it works.
property owner have any say because PG&E actually has to modify the easement?
Yes, that is correct. So
Okay.
PG&E will modify their easement with this property owner, and that is already in the works right now.
Well, I end up with the concern related to John's in that if the terms of the easement aren't finalized, that's another.
Yeah, the terms are finalized. So right now, it's a matter of the documentation being prepared and executed. One of the only,
You'll
Like I said-
excuse me, but in my world, it isn't done till it's signed.
understood.
But I know what you mean, that the terms are finalized. Everyone's agreed to the
everything is in
terms,
place.
but the process isn't complete.
That's correct.
Okay.
Is the requirement of the fence, is it similar to like a, pool fencing where you're blocking visual and access, or is it, what is the purpose of the
So
fence?
there's two, it depends on where you're at. If you're on AT&T's side, it's a safety standard. PG&E, I think right now they're looking at it as leaning on more of a safety standard as well, whereas they used to allow wood fences, but I think that they're becoming to a point to where they can see deterioration and wear and tear.
Right.
Plus it's wood. It's
No, I mean, I can understand PG&E, especially in the current atmosphere,
Yes.
making that jump. I'm just curious, because it seems to me that you could come up with a facsimile of a wood slat fence that's actually metal, that's not, as opposed to saying a wrought iron.
Yeah, the two standards that they're, I don't want to say implementing, but from what we're seeing is going to be implemented is either chain link or wrought iron. That is what they're stating that are going to be allowed.
So just to chime in from the staff perspective, fencing is a by right allowance in the ag district. Staff address the design as proposed. Generally, chain link fencing is discouraged, and so we condition the project to be constructed out of wood with the intention to try to match the agricultural aesthetic of the community in some of the outlying areas. It sounds like that's not going to be an option, and so the fence is by right, and the commission could delegate or ask staff to look at specific design elements of the fence as proposed as a part of the building permit. But they do have a right to construct a fence. So it's come in somewhat as identified, under the guise of design review. However, there's no city requirement that the fence be there. And so it's a safety issue, trying to separate their equipment from the general public access. And then the city's saying, we want it to look like this if it's going to be there. Just to-
Why is chain link discouraged?
Just the appearance.
So the aesthetics are an issue. I'm wondering, does the Star Crocker people know about this change in the design for the fence?
I don't know if that has been communicated to them by PG&E or not, because we don't deal with them. PG&E does directly.
Would they have a say? I mean,
They do.
I mean,
They
based on-
absolutely have a say.
oh, okay, so that probably needs to be done too. They
Well,
might have.
and they have stated, ever since this project came to inception, they wanted a wood fence.
Yeah.
And I just don't know where those conversations have aligned at this point, whether or not, because literally this is hot off the press, PG&E's new standard. So, and we're starting to see it, because I've got multiple PG&E projects across this Bay Area where they're changing it right now.
Is there a mechanism where, since fences are by right, and there's some sort of agreement with the Crocker and Star people, could we pass this contingent upon sort of accept, or under the discretion of NOAA, or professional staff, and approval of the Crocker and Star people?
Absolutely.
Meantime, I'm wondering if we have a complete application. We don't have design for the fence. We don't have an easement for the fence. We don't have an easement for the rest of the changes that are necessary by the property owner. In the works, yeah, but like the man said, until it's signed, it's not done. So I'm looking at something that's not ready. It's not a complete package.
So
They don't even have an easement yet
so
to do the work they want to do.
The plans identify the location of an easement, which is existing and was characterized by AT&T as the access point for the infrastructure. So this is new information to staff that they had not negotiated the terms. And then with regards to the fencing, there's also new information that the design was changing. So staff had deemed the project complete, but it sounds like there were some elements that have come up in the meantime that have inserted questions into the ultimate design and access.
I think I just want to step in and clarify the easement with the property owner in its right exists with what PG&E is allotted under their easement. So what's represented in the plans is what is legally on title with what PG&E has rights for and what they can convey to us as those similar rights with a modification to the easement with the property owner and PG&E. Those terms and have been approved by both parties, or all three parties, PG&E, AT&T, and the property owner. And PG&E is in the process of drafting the documents for execution. Those items should have no bearing on what the design review aspect is in front of you right now.
Except it's not
Well,
just design.
without sort of going to that point exactly, it does seem to me, Noah, that just in terms of our process, with respect to the processing relationship between a required easement and the required approval, it doesn't make sense on the application side in a scenario like this to execute and record an easement before you've got the approval. Just makes no sense. At the same time, on our side, we should be concerned that we avoid putting ourselves in a position where we approve a project that may not have the required rights, or that could be in conflict with the easement. What I would expect, if we were attentive to this, is that, we'd require a copy of the proposed easement to make sure that it's consistent with the project, and then we would condition the approval on a recordation of an easement consistent with Exhibit B, or, whatever that is, however that's formatted in the staff report and the resolution. That would be the way to organize it. Here, I don't think we actually have the tools to do that in hand. And, it's not that I think this conflict is a big deal in and of itself, but based on what we've heard, there's at least the possibility that Mr. Crocker would say, no wood, no easement. And again, we can make our approval contingent, but it's contingent on something we don't even know what it looks like, how to format it, exactly what to say about it, other than something broad and vague that kind of sweeps it all in, like recordation of an easement consistent with his approval. This is not my favorite way to do it. I'd rather be more precise. But certainly in the future, I think we should be attentive, just so that we don't end up with the cart before the horse on one of these, especially in this three-party scenario, which I guess is really what all of these, for us, very desirable cell installation as modification to an existing transmission tower, they're all going to be three-party deals, just by definition, which, adds some wrinkles.
So
that's a thought.
just to chime in, so staff would never bring any project forward that required an off-site easement. So just so you know, obviously if someone needs rights to access another property for their project to work, staff would never bring that forward until those rights were acquired if they're off-site. However, property owners are required to sign applications. So under that requirement, the property owner is aware that this application is coming forward. They've been generally supportive, and your points are well made and well taken. I think the issue has been the potential design change of the fence that may affect the recordation of the easement. So I think there's two ways to go at this point. The Planning Commission could continue them to finalize the easement conditions and bring back the design of the fence, or the Planning Commission could approve the project subject to recordation of the easement in keeping with the requirements of as it's identified in the application materials, and then provide any direction regarding the fence or concerns over that to staff to ensure it's addressed. Just to backtrack on the fence, a 6-foot fence doesn't even require a building permit. So that is a by right issue. However, I do feel the commission has the ability to condition the design or to review the design to address potential aesthetic concerns.
Yeah, I would assume, unless you told me otherwise, Noah, that where the by right component is a part of the application, then it's part of the project for design review purposes. They could have left it out and then built it later. They could have built it first and then brought the application. But if it's part of the package, it's part of what we look at. So with that long digression, I do have another question, and this is about the graphics here on the coverage analysis.
Yes.
The key has a black bullseye for existing sites and a red bullseye for proposed sites. I don't see any existing sites shown on these images, which is fine, but it just has me wondering where the existing sites are.
So the existing site is best represented probably on page 2. You will see the yellow. And do you have
Page 2 of.
Page 2 of the coverage map.
34
So
though.
page 31.
Yeah.
So you see the yellow, and you see how large, and I could walk you through it if you want me to come over to show you exactly what I'm referring to. But as you see how large the yellow kind of at the top and on the left side
Yes.
are,
Yes?
if you were to pan out further, you would see that within that yellow zone, there is an existing site. But it just, with
So
this
that's up-
scale, it is not represented because it's too far out.
That's up Howell Mountain somewhere? Where is it? Do you know where that tower is?
I do not have the address of where that those
Okay.
other sites are.
That's not critical. I'm just trying to understand. And that's the only other AT&T cell tower location in the St. Helena
Within that
vicinity?
vicinity.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's Howell Mountain Road. The mountain itself is just north generally. Oh, those are all of my questions. Are there any other questions from the commission, Bobby?
I had a couple more.
Ah.
This is intended to cure your communications problem?
It is, yes.
When we had the fire, AT&T self-service was zip, nothing.
Estimated.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I can just kind of expand on that. So during the fires, AT&T lost 4 sites, and they're still in the process of going through and rebuilding that infrastructure.
Okay, okay. Is this also intended to support 5G?
It will support 5G once it's integrated. We're not integrating all sites yet.
Fifth generation?
The 5th generation technology, like right now, your current status on when you use your cell phone, you're operating on 4G technology. 5G is what's next. And that's
More
it's-
data, essentially.
It is. It's more data at higher speeds. That's what it amounts to. So there's certain radio units that really is there's antenna changes and radio changes that will integrate into 5G.
Okay.
Bobby?
Yes, my questions have to do with the equipment that's going to be on the going to be installed, particularly the emergency generator. My concern is always noise
Yes.
and hums, and for neighbors because the sounds travel across the valley pretty well at night. So I'm wondering, first of all, do these things make noise? Secondly, if they do, what are you going to do to insulate where they live from the rest of us?
Yeah, so the emergency generator obviously is that. It's only in case of emergency purposes.
Right.
The operation time is outside of an emergency. It will be tested probably once a month, maybe every 2 months, running about 15 minutes just to make sure that everything is operational and within business hours. At that, it meets the DB standards that are per code, and it also meets the hazardous material standards as well.
Does that mean it's going to be enclosed with any kind of insulation?
It will not, so it's a self-contained unit, and the self-contained aspect of it meets the code.
Will there be, if it does end up disturbing people,
Yes.
will there be a complaint number posted at the site of this tower so people can call and you would be open to accommodating any complaints, or is that?
Yeah, so on every project, every site that AT&T has, there is a placard at the front of it with a 800 number for any type of issues. On top of that, since this is an emergency generator, can only imagine that there's going to be something else going on outside of just the generator in operation, outside of standard hours.
Right. Well, you just in case,
Right.
you know.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, that's my main concern. And the other parts of the equipment are not noise generating at all? Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Thank you. We'll deliberate. Somehow.
I did have one question of staff.
Oh, questions for staff. This is
yes.
the time for that.
In the Verizon application, at the end of the day, I believe maintenance was made one of the conditions on the film. These guys are using the same film. Was the same condition included? Cool.
That's right, yeah.
Any other questions for staff?
No.
Okay. What do y'all think?
I'm wondering if there's any disadvantage to the applicant of us not approving with stipulations tonight, or any advantages, and conversely, any advantages to having this done tonight as opposed to continuing this and having it done somewhere down the line when those contingencies are met.
Well,
Where are we on the shot clock?
That's a good question. The staff and the applicant have a little bit of a different calculation on the shot clock. However, to be conservative, if it is a continuance, we would like to have the staff direct us to, or the commission direct staff to engage in a tolling agreement also, just basically as belt and suspenders, because we don't know what the timeline on these finalized documents would be, and staff's not going to put the commission or the city in a position of an automatic approval. So if a tolling agreement was not brought forward, staff would bring the item forward in keeping with the most conservative calculation of the shot clock for a denial, and staff's communicated that, just to preclude any automatic approval that would occur at the expiration of a shot clock. But the applicant has been very amicable and has worked well with staff.
Well, my feeling would be I would like to cooperate with that, but not if it wasn't, not if the rest of the commission was uncomfortable with that.
Well, I don't think they're going to construction in the next 30 days, or even likely in the next 60 days. At best, it would be 90 days and out. They wouldn't start until spring.
But
We get a lot of rain. We
Are
get a
there-
lot of rain.
If I can chime in,
yes, you can chime.
well, excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that.
That's not for you to say. You're welcome to speak. Please come to the microphone.
So, while I do acknowledge the shot clock aspect, there are also certain criteria that AT&T is looking at, as well as timelines. And although, yes, we are not building this within the next 60 to 90 days, but our construction drawings are being put together right now. We're looking to file for our building permit within the next few weeks. The easement agreements, everything is going to be finalized within the next few weeks. So saying a continuance at this point just to address whether or not what type of fencing material we're going to use, and or if the easement has been executed, because obviously we won't go into construction if the easement has not been executed, because we won't have those land rights to do so, would be a burden on AT&T to take that timeline out. I feel that as I look at the project, and I'm standing here tonight, I don't see any reason why we couldn't approve it with certain conditions and work with NOAA on what aspects that ends up being, whether or not, and ultimately, I probably would say it's going to end up being a wood fence, just knowing what happened with the property owner. That's my gut. That's what I'm feeling from those communications. I would definitely say we don't want a continuance tonight.
And staff would just add, with the previous tolling agreement we did get, it was quite a bit of administrative back and forth between the city attorney's office, Verizon's attorneys, because they were the previous applicant. It took a lot of time. just so you know.
I'd rather not do that. This one's going to be 105 feet tall. The way it is now, do we have any height limits at all?
That's a good question. So PG&E they don't have to follow our zoning restrictions for height limits in the zoning district. Our jurisdiction or purview comes for the extension, the addition onto it, and we don't have any limits or elements that would address that. It's just because they're adding the addition, the use permit is required, and the design review. The city has purview over the design. I will identify, as we did previously, co-locating new infrastructure on existing structures is one of the best ways to mitigate design impacts. We've all seen terrible cell tower designs and even terrible faux cell tower designs, and frankly, even the good faux towers are not as visually insignificant as mounting onto an existing structure that you're already trained to kind of glaze over just visually.
Well, I would
For
argue
staff
that a little
perspective.
bit. I need to point out the water tower on Jameson Canyon Road, which really does look like a water tower and is really a cell tower. So there are ways of integrating it. I also noticed that the county got another tree just approved, and we're getting another cap on top of an existing tower of over 100 feet. And once again, by doing this again, we sort of had a standard pattern they're falling into. That, every one of these in town will look like this. I'm not so sure that's what we want either. Particularly when they start popping up in residential districts, of which there are several towers in town that would qualify. So I'm not so sure that we just want to fall into this pattern of approving these things with this design over and over and over, especially when everybody else are getting something that's considerably more attractive than we're getting. So I recognize your need to get this done, but I also recognize it's a right and will be there in the next 100 years. This is not called the heart of Napa Valley for no reason at all. It's one of the prettiest places in the United States. We don't want to make it look like a communications center that's so clearly a communications center. So I had problems with the Verizon design. I have problems with this design. It's exactly the same, except a little bit taller, I think. That's why I asked the height question. And apparently we have no height limitation either. Especially when I believe the application is not complete.
Can I ask another question? Because I forgot to ask. Does that extra 12 feet put a higher risk on the whole thing collapsing in a wind storm, or is that already been, the engineers have already said that's fine?
Yeah, no. So what happens, just some backstory on how all that is designed, is PG&E does all that design work. We don't do any of the design work ourselves. Well, so they don't essentially allow us to touch the tower. All the construction is done by PG&E, all the design work is done by PG&E, and the installation of that top hat, which is what we call that 12-foot extension, is done by PG&E.
So they essentially have given you no reason to believe that that would add any risk to bringing those wires down in a big, fat, terrible storm.
That is correct. Trust me, we have, or should I not say we, but AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, everybody has hundreds of sites on PG&E towers, Southern California Edison towers, across this state. Not one has come down. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me the hard part here really, if we wish to move forward this evening, and I would rather do that than not myself, is determining what it is we're approving. We have the sort of narrative description of a project modification that's been presented by the applicant this evening. Some uncertainty because it depends on what happens in the dialogue between PG&E and the property owner as to what the final fence design will be. I think that leaves us with a couple of options if we're to act tonight. The classic approach for something like this, if one's working on a transaction that needs to close, would be to say something like, with respect to the fence, substantially conforming to. Then I suppose in this situation, we'd want some clear language in the conditions of approval that requires staff review and approval of the construction design before the construction permits issue. It also does seem to me appropriate to condition issuance of the construction permit on recordation of the easement modification, and to say so, so that everyone's reminded that the city needs evidence of that. That's the right place for it, I think, in the process. You don't want to construct without it. PG&E doesn't want you to construct without it. But it's a way of making sure that nothing glitches in that regard in the process. And if we don't proceed with the substantial conformance fix, then then there are other ways to move forward. We could just say with a 6-foot fence and leave it wide open. We could say with a 6-foot fence, subject to review and approval by staff. And we can't do either of those things or something like one of them, then I think we're stuck. So from my perspective, that's the question for the commission, is how do you want to, how does each one of you think, what do you think about the idea of modifying the conditions of approval to provide sufficient flexibility for action tonight? Or, what do you think about that? Does it work? Does it not work? That's what I'd like to hear from each of you.
Go ahead. Well, no, go ahead. You haven't spoken. Yeah.
I don't really. It seems as if we can sculpt the language to cover these 2 or 3 points. I don't see why we should hold it or push it down, kick the can down the road, because I don't think. I think we look at these towers as they are what they are. I don't think anybody relishes the thought of them being there, but I don't think it's really realistic to think that they're going to be popping up every 5 feet either. I think this is I agree that this is a probably more or less impactful way to put these on, just to put them on something that already exists. I mean, I think illustrated by a couple of the illustrations, it was hard to tell which one had the rendering added onto it, in effect. The really more from the photo illustrations than the actual drawings, because it becomes less glaring. So my thought would be if we can, condition it on the Crocker, the property owner approving this fence change and tidying up those easement bookkeeping issues. I don't see why we would kick it down the road.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like the first two things you said when you were giving the example, and you said two. That sounded pretty good to me. So if you're wondering which of those two, I mean, I think that I agree that if we can do it tonight.
I was wondering if I can remember.
Well, if we can do it tonight with covering those two issues, I think there were two. I'm okay with that. And I agree. I mean, we want to be able to use our computers, and it's just one of the requirements that's not so aesthetically pleasing, and maybe not pleasing in other ways too. It's just like we drive our cars. So anyway, yeah, I could go for it tonight.
One more thing that we need to consider. If we move forward with approval of this as designed, we've essentially adopted a de facto design guideline. This will be the second one, same design.
I thought each one was considered individually. That
Come on.
there are no precedents.
Yeah, that's what you hope.
Well,
But
that can be the argument.
This is number two. So
Okay.
we have adopted a de facto design guideline for these towers. The rest of them will look like this. And
Well-
yes, there will be more.
Well, I'm not sure it's a done deal like that, but I understand your concern. But I think that we could. I mean, it is part of ever since I've been on the Planning Commission, every time that someone would be afraid that a precedent was being set, that it was the language is always, each case is individual. If we get one more than that, maybe everything after that. Well, no, all I'm saying is that that is our philosophy, or it has been. And it's in the bylaws, I believe, that
I don't
each
think that'll
decision
work
is-
with the telecommunications companies, given the heft they have on both the federal and state level. I think we've.
Well, I don't know.
well,
What do you think?
Well, I think John's concern is appropriate, and it doesn't. I think it's a problem whether we approve this project tonight or not. So it doesn't affect how I feel about tonight's action, but I've been listening to John and thinking about it, and I'll sort of give my own characterization of his comments, which I'm taking to heart, which is that, in neighboring jurisdictions, the process has been approached differently. I don't know anything about the details of the water tower and its review and approval, how that worked, but, different results, some of them potentially much more attractive and arguably more appropriate, at least for some, perhaps many or most likely locations in the city of St. Helena. They've been approved elsewhere. I am reminded as I think about this of the comments in the staff report, and I think the same comment was in the staff report on Verizon too, that St. Helena's never adopted any local regulations, and I think that puts us at a very real disadvantage when an applicant comes forward and presents staff with a proposal. If the proposal is consistent with, I'll just say industry practices, for lack of a better term, and otherwise seems consistent with zoning and what this broader framework of applicable criteria that we have, then I'm hard pressed to see how staff gets to a radically different result absent some clear direction from the council and/or commission. We have some influence on that direction going forward, although, I really think a local ordinance would be the best vehicle. I cringe a little bit when I think about how long it might take to get that to a place of sufficient priority on the list of code-related things that we would like to do to where it actually happens. So, I'm not sure what to propose as a concrete step. But I'm thinking about that, and I will come up with something that we can do, because I don't want to. I don't want you to think, John, or anyone else on the commission to think that in suggesting that we move forward to approve this application tonight, that I'm disregarding or dismissing that concern. I think we should be thinking about what we would want, for example, if it's an installation at Spotswood, or if one is proposed at Spotswood,
Holy moly.
where we've got another transmission line
Totally.
running through, in the heart of the city. But I'll talk to Noah about how to get something on our agenda that will give us an opportunity to focus on that subject down the road.
I think I really agree with that, and I'm happy for it too. And I'm inferring from that if we did get an ordinance that had more stringent design requirements, that would, I don't like to use the word, but I don't know what other word to use, that would trump the precedent worry that you have. Is that accurate?
Once we had an ordinance, yes, it would trump the precedent, but until we have an ordinance, I don't see any way.
Right.
Once we start down this road, and yes, this is the second one of almost identical design. They're using battery backup, you're using generator. That's about the only difference. Once we start down this road, there are more telecommunications companies out there. There's always a need for additional bandwidth. There will be more of these, just like this. And I agree, we need them in modern society, but they don't need to be, frankly, ugly. You look at this thing, it's not good looking. But there we are.
So, did you have something to add, Ned?
No, I guess in thinking about the idea of, if we're buying into the idea that we're essentially making design guidelines by this, from what we've just been discussing, if we were to prove this, what concrete guideline have we thrown out to the public? If they look at this, is it one of these, erector set towers can have this top hat and a fence, but a lot of these things are contingent upon this actual site. So it seems to me, I think the fear, I guess, of this becoming some rogue force. I don't think it's really in proportion to what's before us, is I guess what I'm,
This
I'm-
looks exactly like the Verizon tower, except it's a few feet higher. They're nearly identical.
Well, here's my perspective on it. I mean, it happens that I'm working with a client on a lease for a new cell tower out in Pope Valley. And I think about sort of the now two applications that we've seen here in St. Helens, the Planning Commission, and I'm easily persuaded that there will be more applications submitted to the city of St. Helena. In fact, in our, connectivity and data-hungry society with the demand for both ever increasing, it seems to me, absent some changes in technology that reduce the density of towers necessary to create the kind of coverage that the customers want, we're going to see more. Increased density is clearly the method by which the improved service is delivered. And, I'm like everyone else who's struggled with the gaps in coverage in the Napa Valley for as long as I've had a cell phone. I love the idea of having better coverage. And I'm also, generally of a mind to think that co-location is in many circumstances, a desirable, efficient solution to the whole challenge of locating these installations. I don't think it's obviously it's not available everywhere. So to do what the service providers want to do and need to do, there are lots of locations where PG&E doesn't have a conveniently located tower. Because of our location between Fulton and Fairfield, Winters, wherever the substations are on the other side of the hills to our east, we've got a transmission track running through town. I'm still more or less scarred for life from the experience of having spent 6 months many years ago in the land department at PG&E indexing right-of-way acquisition summary sheets on 3x5 cards. So I actually remember working on the sheets for at least one of the lines that goes through town. Don't ask me how long ago that was. So it may come up again in St. Helena because we're just there. We've got this track running across. Whether it does or not, I don't know. So I think having a discussion where we talk about what is optimum from our perspective for cell tower, cell installation design in St. Helena, I think that's a good thing to do. But I also, in the interest of moving forward, I'm hungry, I'll admit it. I didn't eat before the meeting.
Under certain circumstances, the chair can make a motion.
And I'm going to say hunger is one of them.
Second that.
But also so that I spare everyone the struggle of trying to recreate the language I proposed. And I'm looking, Noah, at the resolution of approval and more particularly at the part that begins with Section E, Planning Department conditions of approval. We have at the beginning The Planning Commission approves design review for the above described project with the following conditions of approval. Did I miss something?
I was just seeing if Commissioner Anderson wanted to add anything before we moved into.
Oh, you're so thoughtful. Commissioner Henderson, sometimes you just really need to assert yourself a little bit in this crowd, but please.
Just taking it all in. When I spoke to Pam Starr, she had mentioned that there were 3 rows of vines on the other side of the tower that they wouldn't be able to access to farm if the fence and concrete pad were put in below. I think that's partially a communication breakdown with her and her partner, if he is supporting this, but I'm not sure if there's a way to support the right to farm. Is that?
So it seems that the vines are being accessed by driving under the tower currently, which I think obviously would be addressed through the update of the easement. But one way to kind of balance this issue may be to add the right to farm provisions that we typically include in residential resolutions to this one, just to kind of keep everybody on notice about the right to farm actions, but also the farming activities would be subject to easement restrictions.
Yeah, and honestly, with the property owner in control, as nobody's got a loaded gun to the property owner's head here. There's some financial consideration for the modification of the easement. I have no idea what that looks like, but there's always some. And the project doesn't go forward without the property owner's signature in the end. That I'm not really thinking that it's appropriate for us to try to address internal communications with the property owner and his winemaker and partner.
Or so hopefully PG&E doesn't know that they're driving under the tower to access those vines.
Well,
That's the big
once
issue.
upon a time, a long, long time ago, when I worked at a winery higher up Spring Mountain under the same transmission line, PG&E came and told our vineyard manager what he had to do with this and that. I think they wanted him to install a ground for the trellis wires at the end of every row. And having had, for better or worse, some experience in the land department myself, where my father worked for most of his life, I just asked, where does it say in your easement we have to do that? And it didn't. I don't know about the part over Mr. Crocker's property, but that's a pretty old line. And the older easements are pretty simple. So I'm, in any event, that's not our problem. I'm not interested in taking it on. And I'm confident they'll work something out that is feasible on the farming side. I know Mr. Crocker. I can't imagine he would, in the end, fail to do so. So what I'm looking for now is some language in a condition of approval. I'm not sure if it goes in this paragraph E or if it's a separate statement thereafter to the effect that we're approving the project as submitted, with the sole exception to the as submitted that the 6-foot fence around the, whatever that goes around, shall be in substantial conformance with the materials as submitted, or the design as submitted. So that would be change number 1. And then somewhere we have a reference to issuance of building permits. I thought that was in the conditions of approval somewhere here. Well, oh, it says a building permit for the use allowed into this approval shall have been obtained within 1 year from the effective date of this action. This is condition number 2. In that same condition number 2, I'd like to have, and it could be a clause or a separate sentence, something that, to the effect that the easement must be recorded in the copy provided to the city before the building permit issues. And I'd put it in condition 2. And so with those 2 changes, is there anything to approve besides the resolution? No, then I just move approval of the resolution with the 2 changes just described.
I would second.
Any further discussion? Ms. Gamero, would you take the roll, please?
Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Hale,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Vice Chair Pont,
Reluctantly, yes.
and Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
So that brings us to scheduled matters of which there are none. Department reports, do you have anything?
Just briefly, Chair Hardy, Commissioner. First, just follow up on our welcome. So we're very happy to have our 5th commissioner. And as you will recall, we discussed having a governance kind of meeting where we did this 2 years ago about when we had a new commission where we all get together. We talk about kind of our expectations, our kind of desires as we work together. And so we will be looking to try to schedule that hopefully in March. I know at least one of you has provided me the vacation schedule, but please look at your calendars. Let me know if you have any dates blocked for March, and I will look to set that up. It'll be during the week, during the day, typically. So if you have any concerns, just let me know. Still looking to March 19th for the general plan EIR public hearing. I'm just checking my dates just to be sure. Yeah, March 19th. So just reminder to the commission and the public that it is the intention of staff to bring back the draft final EIR, which will include the response to comments, all comments received, and a summary of any modifications that resulted as an outcome of the comment period.
A question just about that. Are the comments received available at this point? I haven't seen them uploaded.
They are, and I have
website.
not done so. Staff's been struggling to kind of juggle the numerous priorities, but that is a request, and we will get that done this week.
Thank you.
So the comments themselves will be summarized and, or not summarized, they will be provided verbatim, but none of the responses are
Right.
available yet. But that will be done, and we'll upload those to the website this week.
Thank
And
you.
I do apologize for the delay because I know some of you have been waiting a while.
When, do you know when a hard copy of this would be available for us?
We would provide that in your packet. So the 12 days ahead of time,
Okay.
or, we would provide hard copies and also be available on the website.
Right, thanks.
But we will provide the comments ahead of time this week, so you'll have the comments at least that we received. If you want a hard copy, I can provide them. Yeah. And then just a kind of a heads up and doing a little bit of help for LAFCO. So LAFCO is updating their policy regarding sphere of influence. And so on March 11th from 9 to 12 in Yountville, they're holding a public meeting on this. It's kind of an interesting topic because, as the commission's aware, we have studied some areas outside our traditional sphere of influence and city limits. And so I think this is, LAFCO's interested in having a conversation around that process and how we got to our decisions, et cetera. And they're trying to write their policies as to how their sphere of influence process is undertaken. The counties provide some comments. I know we've provided some comments, and they've been a little bit not quite in alignment. And so I think LAFCO is trying to get us all in the same room as well as the public and try to see where they can try to get everybody a little bit more aligned. And so just be aware, and I'm welcome anybody from the public to participate. It's LAFCO is a really interesting agency that plays a lot of different roles, but they're often kind of behind the scenes. So it's a way to come up and engage with them as they think about city boundaries and how the city boundary and the county boundary interact. So March 11th from 9 to noon in Yountville at the town hall.
Will the city council be there? Do you know?
I don't know if city council is going to be there. I know they were aware of the meeting. It's a public meeting. City staff, at least one representative from city staff will be there. But just a heads up, just kind of letting the public know that this is occurring. And in light of the discussion tonight, staff will try to agendize, we'll see if we can do it for March 5th, a discussion of commission priorities. So we'll bring the list of all the things that we know the commission's interested in tackling, and we'll allow now our complete commission to chime in on the priorities of that, and staff will try to set them based on our intuition from working with you over the last months. But we'll try to get that agendized for March 5th, and if we can't do it then, we'll do it very quickly after.
Sounds good to me.
Do you think it would be prudent in support of that to get the Chamber of Commerce to weigh in, certainly in terms of the beautiful valley that Commissioner Pont was talking about as the most, a very beautiful place, encouraging quick action on, or not quick, but some action on an ordinance to give us more ability to control the design? I don't know.
Well,
how would we do that?
Well, there's more than one way to reach out to the chamber, but I'd already been thinking, not with respect to the design review issues that came up tonight, but rather with regard to sort of the whole complex set of ways in which city policies and policy directions, sometimes I think in conflict with one another, have effects on businesses. And, I know design review in the sense of, having the town look attractive, and especially the downtown is something that's important to the property owners and the businesses. But I think there's probably other things at this point even more important. And I'm actually surprised that we have seen and heard very little from the commission on some of the policy issues that have been in discussion lately. So I don't know, it's on my mind. I don't know what to propose, but but I'm thinking about that too. Maybe you and I can have a chat at some point, Noah.
I think that would be a great discussion for our governance meeting as well, to talk about how we can
Yes.
kind of more plug in and
Yeah.
align ourselves. Yeah.
So to respond more directly to you, Bobby, I would love to see someone, or more than one person from the business community, whether it's as a representative of the chamber or not, doesn't matter to me, just stakeholders from the business community present at a meeting where we're talking about our priorities. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I'd be delighted, Jesse, if you put that in the star, because I really would love to see business owners come for just that purpose, to hear our discussion of our priorities and to take advantage of an invitation to come speak.
As we begin to write the zoning code, I think it becomes critical that they show up and participate.
Well, right, but, you know,
Yeah,
that
but
priority
where that all stacks
discussion
up,
is,
yeah.
is a great sort of prelim, if you will.
Yes.
So, have we finished department reports and agenda forecast? Adjourned.